Picture this. You are thrown straight into the middle of like this incredibly gripping survival thriller. You know, you've got a dense, suffocating, just terrifying jungle.
Mm-hmm.
And there are these armed thugs hunting the protagonist through just absolute pitch black. It is literally life or death. But here's the catch, and it's a massive one.
Right.
The precious cargo that the protagonist is desperately trying to keep alive, the thing she is literally risking her life and bleeding for, it isn't a person. It's a literal ballot box.
Yeah, it is just an incredibly striking, visceral image to start with, and it actually serves as the perfect entry point for what we are unpacking today.
Exactly.
So we are taking a deep dive into an absolutely brilliant structural analysis of the 2024 film Balota. It was directed by Kippo Banda.
And I found this analysis, honestly, deeply unsettling to read.
Mm.
Because on the surface, you know, Balota has all the dark comedy and the intense survival elements you expect from a localized thriller.
Right, yeah.
You watch it for the tension, you know. But the interpretation we are looking at today, it just completely elevates that experience.
It really does.
It basically argues that we shouldn't just be looking at this as a movie relying on cheap scares in the dark. It is a sprawling, formal political allegory about the incredibly harsh realities of democracy in the contemporary Philippines.
Yeah, the underlying mechanics of the film are just fascinating when you pull back the curtain. The survival thriller genre isn't just aesthetic escapism here.
Right, it's not just for fun.
Exactly. It's a deliberate, formal strategy used to navigate some very real socio-political constraints. Like, we are asked to look at this fictional 2024 election and literally see the entire post-independence trajectory of the Philippine Republic encoded right there within its runtime.
Wow.
It is taking the pulse of an entire nation's institutional rot, and it does it all over the course of a single chaotic election day.
I mean, I want to break down exactly how a single movie accomplishes that heavy lift.
Yeah.
Because to unpack a whole nation's rot, you need a starting point, right? And the analysis grounds everything in the physical spaces where this, so-called democracy actually plays out. We are presented with two incredibly distinct, contrasting environments.
Right, the spatial dynamics.
Yeah. You have the claustrophobic public school turned polling precinct, and then you have this suffocating, lawless rural forest.
And those spatial dynamics, they are everything in this analysis. The schoolhouse basically acts as the performative spectacle of state democracy. When you watch those scenes, you can practically feel the heat, the humidity, and just the sheer noise of it all. The walls are plastered top to bottom with cheap campaign tarpaulins, creating this visual debris of a highly contested local mayoral race.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
And then you have these loud, invasive, repetitive campaign jingles blasting out of speakers. It's just creating a total sensory overload.
It feels like a chaotic circus, honestly. Everyone is packed in there, they're sweating, going through the motions, and just, I guess, pretending to follow the sacred rules of the democratic game.
Exactly. Pretending is the key word there. Because underneath all that really loud civic ritual, there are active networks of vote buying, intimidation, and transactional violence happening.
Right in the schoolhouse.
Right there. The formal layer of state democracy is happening out in the open, but its core is being completely hollowed out in real time, literally in the shadows of the precinct.
Wow.
You have operatives subtly slipping cash behind those very same campaign tarpaulins, ensuring that the actual outcome is decided long before the final ballot is even cast.
See, I struggled with the jump to the jungle, honestly. Like, if the election is actually happening at the school, dragging the box into the woods just feels like, I don't know, an excuse to kick off the action scenes.
Sure, yeah.
Moving away from the polling place seems to leave the actual democratic process behind.
It definitely feels that way initially, but that displacement is actually the entire point of the allegory. Thrusting the central symbol of democratic choice, the ballot box itself, out of the formal institutional space of the schoolhouse and into the unforgiving wilderness, it maps the literal displacement of the rule of law.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the text refers to this as an architecture of meaning. The jungle isn't just a scary backdrop with some trees. It symbolizes the historical retreat of the democratic project into a feral state of nature.
Right.
In that dark, humid landscape, the formal protections of the state are entirely suspended. It becomes a space where civil society realizes it has absolutely no structural protection and just has to physically fight predatory forces to survive the night.
But, this breakdown of law in the jungle, it doesn't just happen by accident, right? If the state is entirely absent out there in the dark, Somebody else has to be filling that power vacuum.
Oh, totally. And the power vacuum is filled by the most structurally central figures in the entire allegorical economy, the villains orchestrating the chaos from the top down.
The candidates.
Exactly, the two mayoral candidates. They represent the dual pathologies of the contemporary state. On one side, we have Mayor Hidalgo. She is the incumbent, and she's this land-grabbing corporate oligarch who treats her employees and the townspeople less like citizens and, well, more like feudal subjects.
Which, and the analysis points this out, ties into this historical concept of cacique democracy.
Right.
It's an academic term, but the mechanics of it are incredibly brutal in practice. It refers to a system where traditional landowning ruling classes just monopolize both economic and political power. It dates all the way back to the colonial era, actually.
Yeah, has deep roots.
The logic is just so simple and cruel. If one family owns the land, they control the jobs. If they control the jobs, they control whether you eat. So when election day comes, you aren't voting based on policy, right?
Right.
You are literally voting to keep your livelihood.
Exactly, it's coercion.
Hidalgo's campaign is built entirely on raw capital and terror, yet her rhetoric, she frames all her violence as simply maintaining civic order.
And then positioned as her supposed alternative is Edrelin. And he is a wealthy, smooth-talking, former adult film actor.
Right, such a wild character.
It really is. And he runs on this entirely superficial, hyper-mediated platform that just promises, quote-unquote, change. His entire campaign is just mass entertainment.
All style, no substance.
Exactly. It's driven by social media virality with absolutely zero substance behind it. He offers no actual policy, just the aesthetic of disruption.
Looking at that ballot is profoundly depressing to me. It's a completely manufactured choice. Like, you are being asked to act as the referee in a heavyweight boxing match, but you are locked inside the ring. Both fighters are armed with brass knuckles, and the promoters have already placed bets on who wins.
That's a great analogy.
Right. You aren't managing the game. You are just desperately trying not to get crushed by it.
Yeah.
Neither of these candidates offers a real vision for structural reform or human flourishing at all.
No, not at all. They are just two factions of the exact same predatory elite. They're basically just fighting over local resources, municipal budgets, and the ultimate prize, which is the monopoly on violence in that town.
Wow.
The democratic process is thereby reduced to basically choosing your preferred flavor of systemic exploitation.
It's so bleak.
It is. The vast distance between their shiny public campaigns and the brutal, lethal ballot snatching their private armies are executing in the dark, it completely shatters the illusion of a functioning state. The electoral system is exposed not as an instrument of popular will, but just as a violent game played by dynasties who view the impoverished electorate as completely disposable pawns.
And caught right in the absolute center of this violent game is our protagonist, Emmy. She's played by Marian Rivera, and she really serves as the emotional and, well, physical anchor of this entire ordeal.
She's amazing in this.
Yeah, she is a strict, deeply dedicated public school teacher. Rivera's performance completely strips away any typical mainstream glamour. She is raw, physically battered, covered in mud and blood. Her resilience isn't born out of, action hero tropes, It's born out of exhausting labor and sheer desperate survival instinct.
Yeah, and Emmy's character carries this incredibly potent allegorical weight in the paper. She represents the subaltern civil service, essentially the underpaid, invisible working class base that actually keeps the government's lights on.
Right.
In the Philippines, public school teachers have historically served as the frontline election inspectors. They are the literal guardians of the vote.
That's a huge responsibility.
It is, and this places them directly in the crosshairs of volatile electoral violence, yet they remain chronically underpaid and completely structurally abandoned by the very state they are risking their lives to serve.
The visual metaphor used to convey that entrapment is unforgettable. Emmy has to protect her adolescent son, Enzo.
Yeah.
She has to protect the final election tally.
But the box.
Yeah, so to ensure the physical plastic box isn't wrested away from her by these militias, she physically handcuffs herself to it. When she clicked that metal cuff around her wrist, I realized the depth of what the film is saying. She is literally chained to the system.
Yeah. The imagery acts as a brutal metaphor for structural entrapment. Emmy cannot simply walk away from the conflict. She, and by extension the civil society she represents, is forced to basically drag this heavy, dangerous democratic apparatus through the mud.
It looks exhausting.
It is.
Yeah.
She is running for her life from the very forces that claim to govern the society. The weight of the box slows her down, it exhausts her, and makes her a target, but her civic conditioning just refuses to let her abandon it.
Which leads to the most chilling thesis of the entire analysis, I think. Because she's chained to this heavy plastic box, she can't just sprint to safety, you know?
No.
When she's eventually backed into a corner in the jungle, she's actually forced to use the ballot box itself as a blunt weapon of self-defense.
Huh.
Like she is swinging the receptacle of democracy at the heads of the people trying to kill her.
It's wild. It posits this terrifying reality about the degradation of institutions. In a profoundly broken system, civic duty can no longer remain polite or passive or procedural.
Right.
It must morph into visceral defensive counter-violence just to keep the promise of a vote alive. The ballot box ceases to be a sacred vessel of popular sovereignty. It is stripped of its ideological majesty and just becomes a literal bludgeon to survive the night.
Just to stay alive.
Exactly. The state has failed so completely that the very tools of democracy must be weaponized against the state's own elite beneficiaries.
I gotta say, watching this, I kept waiting for the procedural safety net to kick in. You know, like I was waiting for the moment she flags down a police cruiser or runs to a courthouse or gets word to a federal agency to report the stolen ballots.
Yeah, of course.
Because if she is a government employee being hunted by private militias, the logical step is to go to the authorities.
You expect that safety net because we are all conditioned by standard narratives to believe in the ultimate triumph of the law. But the director executes a fascinating formal maneuver here, which the paper calls the absent court of systemic justice.
The absent court.
Right. Throughout Emmy's entire grueling trek across the wilderness, there is no pristine precinct to retreat to. There is no uncompromised federal agency sweeping in with helicopters to save the day. The formal legal system is entirely off-screen.
It just isn't there.
It exists only as a distant, hollow myth that has absolutely no bearing on the survival of the people on the ground.
So, by actively refusing to show a functioning legal system, the film makes this massive historical statement. It's arguing that for marginalized communities, the formal legal apparatus is just an exercise in futility.
Completely.
It is structurally weighed against them and totally manipulated by the elites. Justice isn't something handed down by an impartial magistrate in a clean, air-conditioned courtroom. It's an asymmetrical brawl fought in the mud. The law only exists for those who can afford to buy it.
Exactly. And this institutional rot extends directly to the police force as well. Take the character of SPO1 Morales, a local police officer.
Oh, yeah?
In this ecosystem, the police force does not exist to offer protection to the vulnerable. They operate merely as the armed muscle for whichever oligarchic faction happens to be signing their paychecks or offering the biggest bribe.
Right.
It demonstrates the complete weaponization of state apparatuses against the populace. The uniform doesn't signify the law at all, it just signifies power.
But Morales does eventually intervene and help Emmy, though. It's a pretty big turning point in the chase.
He does, but the underlying mechanism of that intervention is really crucial to understand. He doesn't intervene and save Emmy's son out of some sudden awakening to institutional ethics.
Oh, right.
He doesn't suddenly remember his oath to uphold the abstract rule of law. He helps her solely because she was his former teacher. More specifically, she was someone who accepted his marginalized identity in the past when others didn't.
Uh-huh. So the intervention is entirely based on a personal history of gratitude, not a systemic mechanism of justice.
Exactly. It suggests that formal institutional ethics have completely collapsed. Any remaining capacity for protective action in this society doesn't come from the uniform, the badge, or the institution. It only survives through residual informal networks of personal relationships and communal empathy.
Wow.
Yeah, you are saved because someone remembers your kindness, not because you have a legal right to be protected.
That is a remarkably bleak way to view society, honestly. But it makes complete sense within the logic of the film.
It does.
Let's pivot to the broader population of the town, though. We touched on the rampant vote buying happening in the schoolhouse. And normally, political dramas take a very, high and mighty stance on this. They look down on the electorate for selling their votes, framing it as a betrayal of democracy.
Yeah, but the analysis highlights how this film brilliantly refuses to moralize that opportunism. It looks at the impoverished underclass, people living on the absolute margins.
Mhm.
For them, the election isn't some grand ethical horizon or a philosophical debate about the future of the nation. It is a transactional matrix.
It's about survival.
Exactly. When you are starving, a long-term promise of policy reform means absolutely nothing. Cash in hand today means your kids eat tomorrow.
I mean, you can't demand alternative ethical commitments from people who are just literally trying to survive the weeks.
No, you can't.
If the structural reality of the state systematically rewards corruption and penalizes integrity, then selling your vote isn't a moral failure. It is a fully internalized, pragmatic response to cyclical failures. It's a vital survival mechanism in a landscape defined by absolute structural poverty.
And the formal architecture of the film constantly reinforces this feeling of cyclical failure and disorientation. The claustrophobic handheld cameras, the jarring edits, the stark, blinding contrast between the neon-lit campaign stages and the murky, suffocating woods.
Yeah, it's dizzying.
It is. It purposefully places the audience in a state of perpetual sensory overload. It is a formal analog for a society dealing with state-sponsored disinformation and total political fatigue. You are exhausted just watching it, which mirrors the exhaustion of the citizenry.
Which brings us to the climax, and this is where my expectations were completely subverted, because as an audience member watching a thriller, I am deeply conditioned for a very specific payoff, right?
Well, for sure, the Hollywood ending.
Yeah, exactly. She survives the grueling trek through the jungle. She uses the heavy box as a weapon to literally fight off the thugs. She protects her son at all costs. The formula basically dictates that she delivers the votes, the truth comes to light, the corrupt politicians are hauled off in handcuffs by the military, and the good guys win.
But the film entirely denies the audience that easy Hollywood catharsis. It drops a massive reality check. Emmy survives the horrific ordeal. She successfully delivers the ballot box, bloodied and battered but victorious in her immediate mission. But the resulting count of those very ballots actually guarantees the re-election of the corrupt incumbent, Mayor Hidalgo.
Wait, really? After everything she endures, after the physical and emotional toll, she bleeds for this box only for the oligarch to secure another term. That is a deeply cynical twist.
It is incredibly cynical. It refuses the comforting fiction of systemic rehabilitation. There is no utopian sweeping away of the old guard. The cavalry does not arrive.
Wow.
Instead, we see Emmy, exhausted to her core, use her leverage as the certifying official, but she doesn't use it to overturn the whole corrupt system because she structurally lacks the power to do so.
So what'd she do?
She merely negotiates a baseline of survival. She demands that Hidalgo treat her employees and the town's laborers with a modicum of basic fairness moving forward.
That's it, just a negotiation.
That's it.
I mean, she doesn't have the power to fix the world, but she secures just enough leverage in that specific moment to demand that the working class gets to live another day. It is cynical, but I guess it is incredibly pragmatic. She understands exactly where she stands in the power dynamic.
Yeah, the ultimate thesis of the text asserts that preserving electoral integrity doesn't magically eradicate systemic oppression. Counting the votes fairly doesn't fix a society where the choices are already manufactured by elites.
Right.
It forces the audience to look at democracy in its compromised state, not as an engine of sudden liberation, but as a grueling, unending holding action.
An unending holding action. Man, that phrasing really sticks. It tells us that the ballot alone cannot fix a fundamentally broken ecosystem.
Exactly.
You have to fight, sometimes physically, sometimes just by dragging a heavy box through the mud, just to maintain the absolute bare minimum of civic space. It shifts the burden entirely back onto us, the audience.
It does. The film transforms what could have been just a localized action thriller into a sprawling historical document. It stands as a profound piece of visual testimony about how a society thinks about its own vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
It explores how citizens fear their own institutions and how they process the exhausting everyday labor of their own survival in a system designed to exploit them.
To take a premise like a woman running through the woods with a ballot box and unpack it into a sprawling statement on cacique democracy, the subaltern civil service, and the collapse of the judicial system is just brilliant. It fundamentally changes how you look at the mechanics of power.
It really does.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Whether you are prepping to analyze cinema or you're just intensely curious about the hidden structures governing our lives.
Building on that final uncomfortable realization about the film denying us a clean resolution, there is one final thought to mull over for you. If the formal institutions designed to protect us have eroded, and democracy truly is just an unending holding action, what informal networks of empathy and personal connection do you rely on to navigate your own survival in a compromised system?
Wow. Because when the lights go out and you are out there in the dark, you have to know what it is you are truly willing to drag through the mud.